Hey everyone, it's James Lambert, the motivational coach and speaker. I really wanted to share what I've been dwelling on most recently in this video, and that is the truest expression of oneself, and also how that unfolds. Because growing up, when I was a youngster, I and a lot of my associates liked the hip hop genre. And I often remember people that you could get a group that was local, sometimes unsigned, but they got a little buzz, but they didn't sell many units. And then eventually, some of them got to become more well known and their music went more, dare I say, mainstream, certainly sold more units, people said, oh, they've sold out or they're fake. And I found this very interesting because I've used this analogy before, but it's like the lobsters or the crabs in the bucket. And supposedly this actually happens in reality. Fishermen attest to this. When one seeks to escape from the lobster pot or the crab bucket, the others actually gang up, as it were, and drag him back down to their level. And I think what it is a lot of people that may be unsuccessful, or at least feel that way themselves, they resent the success of others. And of course, when it's small and local, that's fine because they're seemingly close to them. But once they start getting too big for their boots, why? Because they've sold more records. And you can apply this to anything. It's very, very important. Moreover, a lot of it can be cultural. And what I really encourage you to dwell on, and this is what's really been playing on my mind of late, is who would you be or who are you without all these labels and tags? Because so many of them come from society. So you identify, say you're a middle to upper class white teenager who loves rap. And you might have a real yearning to rap yourself, but you may stop because you're limited, you're fearful that it's not your culture. Equally, you could be a young black male living in an urban environment who loves classical music and longs to actually play in an orchestra and so on. And yet you feel that maybe that's not for you, that's for the elite or for others. And this is all, yes, it's social conditioning, but I want you to see through the veil of illusion that this is. It is a lie. And it's a lie that you can choose, and it's very important with one's thoughts, you can choose to stop believing in it and therefore create a new reality. I myself saw myself as a violent individual, as a fighter. And so, of course, I lived up to that. But once I wanted to change, I needed to get an image in my mind of what I wanted to become, which was this motivational speaker, certainly a happier, more content, more peaceful individual. The thought came first. And even when my environment wasn't showing that, even when some of my associates were still unsavory, even when the very work I was doing, still fighting and on the door, was violent, I did not let go. I held on to the image in my mind of what I wanted to become. And lo and behold, slowly, inch by inch, day by day, that became true. And this is so important because there's the other thing about selling out or being fake or not true to oneself. I remember for the longest time, I used to love the bling. I used to love gold, and I was covered in it. I was like the white Mr. T, and I had a very predominant gold tooth at the front, very predominant. And I dare say, it not only it not only was my love for gold, it sort of represented that yes, if it was gonna kick off, I would be down for anything. And yet, sorry, I'm just a bit distracted by my dog Max. He runs my company, but I want to finish this video while it's on my mind. And yet, once I wanted I wanted to remove it basically. I wanted to no longer have that very predominant gold tooth. And for the longest time, I felt so conflicted by this because I thought, well, is that betraying myself? I mean, is that going to be, who is James without that? That was like, I invested a lot of emotion and time, not to say money, but in that image. And I wondered if I was going to be a sellout, if I was going to be fake. Why? Because I removed a part of my old identity. I thought, am I betraying my roots in Southeast London? All of these things were going on in my mind. And yet, when I was still, my greatest self, dare I say my higher self, was encouraging me to change and that it was time for change. And as I say, no judgment for those of my friends, that deal with it. There's no judgment, but I mean for oneself. For me, it was time to do it. And so what I'm saying is that I was conflicted about making a change, even though I knew it was for the better and it would better reflect me as I was, and yet still there was something stopping me. And so I encourage you, if you're going through a transition and you're worried about betraying your past, remember you are who you are. You don't need, if you're considering tattoo removal or anything, a change of haircut, a change of dressing. You are you at your core. You know what you've been through. So changing an aspect about oneself or your character with one's speech. I used to speak very different than this. I wasn't half as articulate. Now, just improving one's speech, that isn't betraying yourself because you want to hold better diction and be better understood. That's fine. But so many of us, we have to think, we have to still, all right, bruv, keep it like, what? That's not being real. In fact, it's being less real if your higher self is urging you to change and you don't honour that. That to me is the epitome of fake. When you're being urged, when you know it would be in your best interests to turn up at a job interview dressed in a certain way, and yet because you think you're keeping it real, you go in your tracky bottoms on, not at your best, and lo and behold, you don't get the job. You're living up to an old self-belief. So I really encourage you that change is possible. It has to start here. And I was dwelling recently on the walk, saw this beautiful flower, and I thought, how at any stage could you accuse the flower of not being a flower? So when it's first budding, it's a flower. Now when it blooms, and is its full of self like a rose or a daffodil, when it's all blooming in its full glory, it's still a flower. And yet when it begins to wilt and die, it's changed form, but is it not still a flower? In all of those stages, it's still a flower. So you go through your changes from maybe a rough neck, and as I was before, from a fighter to becoming a motivational speaker, to becoming more articulate, to becoming more considerate and kind. These are changes. But I am still James. That non-physical part, if you like, the real me. And I encourage the real you to stand up. Don't fear others' opinions, what they may say if you're undergoing change. I really want you to know you're not alone, because change is a beautiful thing, positive change. So if you feel that you need to change any aspect of your life, go for it. And please, in closing, do not worry about the time. I know things have stopped me. You might want to embark on a new career, or undertake a period of study, or even begin a martial arts journey. And you might think, oh, I'm 30, I'm 40, I'm 20, whatever the excuse is, what's the point? Oh, I'm too old, or I'm too young, or I'm not from the right background. Or all of these are lies, and I want you to see them for the lies they are. Start today. I don't care how old you are, how young you are. The time's going to go anyway, so why not start? If there's a language you've always wanted to learn, get cracking. Why not? If you want to start your martial art journey, you dream to be a black belt, but you're just starting out, go for it. Start today. The book, you think, how am I ever going to write a book? I've not got the time. Start today. Can you write one line? What's the point in one line? Do one line repeatedly. At the end of the year, you've got your book. Now, this may seem overly simplistic, but some of the things we don't take it on board. It's like, I think Winston Churchill once said, so many men, they're walking along, they literally trip over the truth, and then they get up, dust themselves off as if nothing happened, and continue on their way. So today, I want you to realise the truth of how incredible you are. And if you want to change, do not be frightened of that. Go out, make it happen, and believe in yourself like I do. Okay, that's all for now, guys. As always, you are unstoppable, and I believe in you.